Leveling up requires selfishness. I used to think being selfish was one of the worst things a person could be, especially as a woman, because growing up, a good woman was always described as someone who was nurturing and self sacrificing. She was patient, understanding, available, and accommodating. She made people feel comfortable even at the expense of her own comfort. She didn't ask for too much, and she definitely didn't take up too much space. And if she did prioritize herself too much, people became uncomfortable very quickly. They called her vain, self-absorbed, or difficult. But the older I get, the more I realize that almost every woman who successfully transforms her life has to go through a phase where other people perceive her as selfish. A woman looking to upgrade her life simply can't afford to abandon herself. I think deep down, many women know their life would change dramatically if they stopped centering everybody else's comfort all the time. If they stopped over-explaining and over-giving. They know just how much farther they could be if they stopped emotionally babysitting grown adults or stopped dimming themselves so they could seem relatable. But that transition is terrifying because the moment you stop being accessible all the time, people react negatively towards you. You start noticing how much of your identity was built around being useful. And the scary part is that people actually reward that self-neglecting version of you. People praise women who constantly pour into others while quietly running themselves into the ground. They love to call this kind of woman humble, kind, and mature. Meanwhile, the woman who protects her time, invests in herself, says no more often, becomes harder to access, and starts taking herself seriously, suddenly gets treated like she thinks she's better than everyone else. That's why leveling up feels emotionally confusing at first, because on paper, your life is improving, but socially, you start experiencing a lot of resistance. And I don't think enough women talk about how lonely self-improvement can become once your growth starts becoming visible. People love hearing women talk about growth. But the moment the glow up, boundaries, and confidence become real, all that support goes out the window. Because now your evolution affects people. Your discipline reminds people of their lack of discipline. Your confidence reminds people of their insecurities. Your boundaries expose who benefited from your lack of them. And the people who were comfortable with the self-neglecting version of you start subtly trying to pull you back into familiarity. You can't build an extraordinary life while treating yourself like everyone else's afterthought. Leveling up is, by definition, a selfish act. Because every hour you spend building your future is an hour you're not spending managing everyone else's expectations. Every boundary you set protects the energy you'll need to become the woman you're trying to become. The women who seem to have it all aren't necessarily more talented. They're just ruthless about what gets access to their time, attention, and energy. They understand that every yes is a no to something else. Every night spent people-pleasing is a night not building your business. Every relationship that drains you delays the life you're trying to create. Every opportunity you accept out of guilt costs you an opportunity you actually wanted. That's why leveling up demands you to put yourself first, because if your dreams always come second, they might not actually come true at all. The moment you stop abandoning yourself, don't be surprised if the people who benefited from that version of you start resisting the change. It's not always intentional either. A lot of the time, it shows up as concern, disappointment, or subtle criticism. People start questioning your priorities. They tell you you're too focused on your appearance, too ambitious, too obsessed with making money, or that you've become less humble. They point out that you're not as available as you used to be, or suggest you've changed for the worse. But underneath all of that is often something much simpler. You're no longer as easy to benefit from. You're no longer centering everyone else's needs before your own. You have standards and boundaries now. You have a life that doesn't revolve around keeping everyone else comfortable. People rarely complain when you're overgiving, but they complain when you stop. Because the version of you that neglected herself was incredibly convenient. And the version of you who has boundaries, that's the version people suddenly find hard to deal with. Funny how the moment a woman starts treating herself like she's valuable, the people who took her for granted often mistake it for arrogance. And that can really mess with your head if you've spent your whole life believing your worth came from being liked. Because many women aren't taught to prioritize themselves. They're taught to manage other people's emotions and anticipate everyone's needs before their own. So when they finally choose themselves, it doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels wrong and uncomfortable, when really, they're just no longer playing the role everyone got used to. A woman can neglect herself for years and people will praise her kindness. But the second she starts protecting herself, suddenly she's selfish. That should tell you everything. And honestly, one of the biggest mindset shifts I've had to learn was understanding that prioritizing yourself and narcissism are not the same thing. Because some women hear messages about self prioritization and immediately fear becoming narcissistic or cold hearted. But taking yourself seriously is not narcissism. There is nothing wrong with wanting a better life for yourself. There is nothing wrong with investing in your appearance. You're allowed to outgrow people and prioritize your own peace of mind. Sometimes leveling up simply means realizing that constantly sacrificing yourself is not actually making your life better. It's just making you easier to consume. And I think a lot of women hit this realization after years of being the good girl, the dependable friend, the understanding girlfriend, the emotionally available daughter, the low-maintenance woman who never asks for much. And then one day they wake up exhausted because so much of that love required self-erasure. At some point, you have to decide whose approval is costing you your potential, because leveling up demands sacrifice, not just physically, but emotionally too. You may have to sacrifice being liked by everyone. You may have to sacrifice constant accessibility. You may even have to sacrifice relationships built on the old version of yourself. And that grief is very real. Sometimes social media oversimplifies self-improvement and makes it seem more glamorous than it actually is. In reality, growth can feel deeply isolating, especially when the people around you benefited from your lack of boundaries. And especially when you start noticing how many relationships were unconsciously built around your self-neglect. Not everybody celebrates your evolution. Some people preferred you struggling, insecure, exhausted, and distracted from your potential because your growth changes relationship dynamics. And this is why leveling up requires a certain amount of selfishness. Because if you wait until everyone is comfortable with your transformation, you will never transform. There will always be somebody who benefits from your smallness. Always somebody who wants access to your time, energy, beauty, attention, or emotional labor. And if you never learn how to redirect that energy back into yourself, your life will stay stuck in survival mode while everyone else feeds off your potential. You can't build a beautiful life while treating yourself like an afterthought. The woman who's building the life she wants isn't asking, "How can I make everyone happy?" She's asking, "Does this actually serve me?" And if the answer is no, she's gone. No guilt and no auditioning for approval. That's the difference between a woman who's surviving and a woman who's leveling up. One is managing everyone else's expectations, the other is managing her own life. So, if protecting your peace, your time, and your standards gets you labeled as selfish, wear the label. Because the people who complain the loudest are usually the ones who lost the most access to you. Alright ladies, that is all for today's video. If you'd like to keep up with more of my content, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Reina Safo. One last thing, always remember to protect the woman you're becoming. I'll see you in the next one.